He had 10,000 copies published. They sold in weeks. Publishers came back. They came to my apartment. They took me to lunch. They brought me flowers. Three big publishing houses wanted to give me a 3-book deal. An almost 80-year-old, a 3-book deal. Is that thinking positively or what?
Welcome to Second Act Stories. I'm your host today, Scott Merritt.
And I'm Andy Levine, Scott's co-host for today's episode. But before we get started, we should share that we've won another award. This is the 2025 ICEE Award for Best Podcast, so pat on the back to all of us.
Yes, congratulations are in order all around. And actually, since our last episode, we were also named a top career podcast by FeedSpot. I guess this all means we're doing something right.
Well, it's great to be honored and get the recognition, and we appreciate everyone who votes for us. But let's move on to today's episode, and you got to meet a best-selling author. Her name is Peggy Rowe. She has a famous son as well, but tell us a little about Peggy's unique story.
Sure, there is just so much interesting to share about her. In short, she was a school teacher, and she became a New York Times best-selling author at the age of 80. Right?
80 years old. Wow, that's amazing.
And if that's not enough, you mentioned her son. Her eldest son, Mike Rowe, was a powerful force who always encouraged her to keep writing over the years.
And this is the Mike Rowe, who is the host of Dirty Jobs, one of the just greatest all-round guys in the entertainment industry. Yes?
Yeah, the one and only. I had a chance to meet him, invite him to be our guest. Jury's still out on that, but when we spoke, he said, "You should interview my mom," and I'm glad to say he was 100% right. So many thanks to Mike and his associate, Chuck Klausmeyer, for making this happen.
So interesting. Well, thank you, Mike. Thank you, Chuck. Let's hear Peggy Rowe's second act story.
Why don't we start by framing up who you are and how people might know you?
Well, I am Peggy Rowe. I'm 87 years old. And I guess my greatest claim to fame has been our oldest son, Mike Rowe, who has done a lot of TV. And he's branched out and he's doing more things than I can even keep up with now. But that's, people associate me with our son. Or at least they used to.
Until you became a best-selling author.
Yeah. When I turned 80, I published my first book. And it became a New York Times bestseller. And what fun. They say nothing succeeds like success. So 2 years later, I put out another book. Simon & Schuster and Forefront are my publishers. And it, too, became a New York Times bestseller. And I did the same thing 2 years later. And it, too, anyway, I just published, my fourth book came out in October.
Wow, what a story. You were 80 years old and you'd never published a book before, and you wound up on the New York Times bestseller list.
I did. Well, a little backstory here. I've been writing my entire adult life. I was a school teacher. And then I took a maternity leave, turned into 15 years because we had 3 children spaced. And I loved staying home. And that's when I wrote. I wrote every day, pretty much just journaled. But I got serious about it in my maybe 40s. So I started small. I mean, in the beginning, I was a school teacher and I taught 3rd grade. And I wrote poetry to introduce units to the children, to introduce vocabulary, to spark their interest in things. Well, they loved my poetry. And one day I was on the playground and I came upon a group of girls who were jumping rope. they had memorized my poems, and they were jumping rope to my poems, to the rhythmic beat of my turtles are pokey wherever they go, they carry their houses. That's why they're so slow. I was just blown away, and that really encouraged me.
So let me rewind a little bit. You were a school teacher, and you were teaching third grade in a public school?
Yes, Baltimore County.
Great. So what inspired that as a career path for you? What was it about teaching that motivated you?
About teaching, well, my mother preached to my sister and me throughout our childhoods that we should be school teachers. It's the best job ever. My grandmother was a school teacher. And my mother just thought that that would be the best career for a girl. And I had little choice. So my sister became a teacher, and I became a teacher. I married a teacher. My daughter-in-law is a principal, a former teacher, and now a principal. My granddaughters are teachers, so a lot of teachers
really runs
in
in the
my
family.
family. Yeah. And I loved it.
What was rewarding about teaching? What did you love the most?
Oh, I've always loved working with children. When I was younger, as a teenager, I did a lot of babysitting. I taught Sunday school. I had horses, and I had a riding school. I just loved working with children. Found it very gratifying. As far as teaching, I really enjoyed teaching. It's challenging. And in my later years, I taught special ed children, and that was very rewarding.
Your poetry certainly had an impact on your students. Did you ever use that talent at home?
When my middle son was in the second grade, his teacher was ready to retire, but she couldn't until the end of the year. She had really lost it. She yelled all the time, screamed at the children. She was not a good teacher, and there was not much administration could do about it. And I remember Scott came home one day and threw his books on the couch and said, I'm not going back. I'm not going back to school. He was 7 years old. You can teach me at home. You're a teacher. So I wrote a poem for him about a teacher who yelled and screamed all day and spit on her kids. It was pure humor. I love humor. It's kind of my trademark. And at 7, Scott read it. He loved it. And I think it really encouraged him to go back and see it through. Also, I began volunteering in the classroom. And I think I lowered the temperature a little bit for everybody, made it a little easier for the teacher and easier for the children. And she really didn't scream as much when I was there.
How else have you used your power of writing to help people?
I've written other stories through the years that have affected people in a good way. I had cancer when I was in my 50s, and it was a horrific experience.
I would imagine, yeah.
And I suffered some depression, which is so not me. And I remember Mike came home for a visit. He was not living at home at that point, but still in Baltimore. And he was really concerned about me. And I talked about my experiences with the surgery and with radiation and depression, and the fact that I had joined a support group. And Mike was so concerned. He said, Mom, don't tell me about it. Sit down and write about it.
Has that story been published?
It's in my third book, which is called Vacuuming in the Nude.
Great title. I love it.
Is the story of my writing journey.
When you had left teaching, you said you took a 15-year hiatus. Did you go back to teaching, or did you wind up doing something else?
I did. I went back. I got recertified. But in the meantime, before I could have my own classroom, I was what they call an instructional assistant. Mm-hmm. And I worked with other teachers. Well, it was a dream job. I worked a half a day. I went in at like 9 o'clock and I was home by 12:30. I didn't have to bring any work home with me. I came home and I wrote. It was wonderful.
What were you writing?
Oh, I wrote 3 children's books that were never published. I sent them out many times. And I still say I'm going to revisit those stories because they're current even today. One was about bullying. They had a lot of humor in them, but they also had a message, a story. Right. But I didn't know anybody, and I got rejection after rejection after rejection. It was so depressing after a while. And I'll tell you, I have 3 wonderful children, but Mike was so encouraging with my writing. He loved my writing, and he thought I had something. So he encouraged me to keep at it. Whether it's published or not, just keep writing, which I did.
All right. How do you overcome all that rejection?
Well, I'll tell you, Scott, I did my homework. I took courses in the local college, writing courses, writing fiction, writing nonfiction, writing memoirs, writing humor, writing for children. I took so many courses. And the most valuable thing was that I joined critique groups. One of my friends in the critique group went to a conference, and she picked up some papers from me. She said, "Look, Peggy, these publishers are looking for writers. Your short pieces." It was a horse magazine in Canada. It was called Horse Canada, actually. And I wrote a humorous piece for that. Well, they bought it. That was my first published piece. And, like I say, nothing succeeds like success. And when you have that first success, you're spurred on to keep going. So I did.
So after all those years of writing, at what point did you feel I've arrived?
Well, when that first magazine came out, I remember my husband came home from volunteering that day because he was 69. He's 5 years older than I. And I said, "Here it is." He said, "We're going to celebrate. We're going out and celebrate." So we went to the Golden Corral. We went to the early bird special at the Golden Corral. And we just got anything we wanted to eat. So we sat there. And he read my story aloud to me, and I might have cried a little bit, but it was just so meaningful because it was like all of these years I've been writing, have I been writing for nothing? That really did it for me, knowing that people were reading my little horse stories. And then I got published in newspapers and magazines, and I went more human interest with humor.
Peggy really found her footing. Her writing career had taken flight, and she used her lived experiences as source material.
When I was 78, I had a horrific experience. I was shopping at Walmart one day, and I left my blue purse hanging on the shopping cart in the parking lot.
Oh.
I came home, reached over for my purse. It was not there. I looked everywhere, and my heart began thumping. This might not mean that much to a man, but to a woman, your life is in your purse. So I went inside, and my husband said, well, first of all, he started canceling credit cards. And then he said, we're going back. We're going back to that parking lot and see if it's still there. Okay. So we went back and we searched. It was a saga. It ended well. A woman had found it. So of course, when I got home, so relieved with my purse, naturally you want to share it with the people you love. So I called the children and I told them about what happened. And when I got to Mike was last. He said, I don't want to hear it. Don't tell me. Sit down and write this story, Mom. It's a great story. Fill it with humor. And so I did. And he said, send it to me. And if I like it, I'll read it as a video. So I wrote the story, and it was a good story, and it was filled with humor and pathos. And oh my golly, it was fear. It was my fear that I wouldn't find. I know, in retrospect, it was a stupid purse, not all that important.
I love this constant reminder from your son saying, "Don't talk to me, write it." He recognized your ability and he kind of forced you to write everything that sounded interesting.
And he's still doing it.
At what point did you say, "Okay, it's time to sit down and write a book"?
Well, this is a continuation of my Walmart story. Mike did read the story. He loved it. And he read it. And then he went out of town. While he was gone, it went viral. 70 million people had read that story. Publishers read it and called Mike and said, Mike, your mother can write. If she can write at least a dozen stories like that about you, because they're all into celebrity sells. If she can do that, we'll publish that book. So Mike called me. Well, through the years, my favorite character was my mother. She was wonderful material. I can't tell you. Well, I can tell you in 25,000, 40,000 words, I can tell you. And so instead of writing about Mike, I wrote about my mother. And I called it About My Mother. And I sent it to Mike. Now, this took me months, but most of the stories I had either already written or they were in my head. So it took me maybe 6 months to get it together. Sent it on the computer to Mike. He sent it out to the big publisher. Publisher got back and said, sorry, I can't use this. Nobody knows your mother. Nobody knows your grandmother. Who's going to be interested in those stories? Michael loved the book. He published it. He self-published it. He had 10,000 copies published. They sold in weeks. Publishers came back. They came to my apartment. They took me to lunch. They brought me flowers. Three big publishing houses wanted to give me a 3-book deal. An almost 80-year-old, a 3-book deal. Is that thinking positively or what?
So 10,000 copies is what it takes for publishers to care. And
care they did. So I went with Forefront and Simon & Schuster. I deal directly with Jonathan Merck at Forefront. He's been wonderful. Held my hand for all my book tours in New York City and doing all that press. It's been an amazing experience. And when I say to Mike, couldn't have done it without you, Mike said, you couldn't have done that first one without me. It's all on you now. He said, if you weren't any good, you wouldn't have had a second one and a third one and a fourth one. And that made me feel really good. Like, maybe I am a writer.
I would argue that you absolutely are. And you have been for many, many years, for decades. And the only thing that's changed since you turned 80 is that the world found out about it.
Oh, that's a nice thing to say. Thank you. Well, let me tell you, writing books opens a whole new world, a Pandora's box, you might say. My publisher insisted that I have a social media presence. I had never been on Facebook before. I had never done Instagram or any of those social media platforms. I knew nothing about them. So I had to learn about Facebook. And fortunately, Mike has people who are very attuned to that, very have expert knowledge in that. So they kind of tutored me. And for since 2018, I've been writing a column and publishing it on Facebook twice a week, just a couple of hundred words.
Right.
I have hundreds of thousands of followers, Scott, and they have taught me so much. They are my focus group. They've taught me what people want. And because of all of their input, I've been able to have, subsequent successful books. They've taught me that people are hungry for something uplifting, something positive,
Right.
something that makes them laugh, something joyful. And that's what I give them in my posts and in my books.
Your stories, your books, are all based on personal experience and your family. How did you break away from, well, this is just how things are because this is how our family is, to recognize that your family behaved differently enough to warrant writing about them?
You know what? I learned early on that everything is material. The most mundane little event that can happen in your home is material. The fact that my husband goes from room to room, following me from room to room, turning off lights, and has been for years, turning down the thermostat, trying to teach me about saving energy and saving money, getting by on less. That is wonderful material. Not only is it wonderful material, it's material that people can relate to.
Absolutely.
If something is relatable, like the Walmart story, who hasn't lost something in their lifetime? Who hasn't been to Walmart? Who hasn't
Right.
observed Walmart people? And who hasn't received a kindness from a stranger?
What are some of the unexpected things your success as an author has done for you?
Well, having 4 books, and I'm into my 5th one, has opened up another world to me. I'm doing public appearances. People pay me to come and speak to their organizations. Or I just a week ago spoke to hundreds of people. They bought a book for everybody, which makes my publishers happy, of course.
Yeah, sure.
So getting up in front of an audience and speaking is something I had never done until my first book came out. Well, it turns out corporations have events at least once a year, and they're looking for somebody that their people can either learn from or be inspired by
Right.
or can relate to. Well, do you realize how many groups are all about the elderly? I mean, there are nursing home groups. There are all kinds of facilities that take care of the elderly. I mean, we live in a what I call the. This is my most recent book. Oh no, not the home. My husband and I 4 years ago moved into a senior living facility. And this was his response when I suggested moving in.
Oh no.
Oh
not the
no,
home?
not the home. Well, he did relent, and we moved in 4 years ago. So here is another chapter in my 80. Well, we moved in 4 years ago. I'm 87, so I was 84. In my 84 years, being surrounded by 2,000 independent living residents. They're my neighbors, 2,000 of them. Do you think they might have a story or two to tell? Oh my goodness. I have enough material for another 10 books. I kid you not.
Amazing.
So tell me about what writing does for you. Not what it leads to, but what it does for your soul.
Writing is work. If you're one of those people, just sit down and write. That's what I do every day. Just sit down and write. Go back later and read it. Writing is in the revision. Writing is in the rewrites. Nothing that you sit down and write this minute is going to be worthy of anybody else reading. You need to go back, revisit it, revise it. It's rewarding to me when I can bring it all together. When I can writing is like putting a puzzle together. So many little pieces that you have to fit in just the right place. And when your piece is finished, the puzzle is together. That's so rewarding.
What motivates you?
People here read my work. And they pass me in the hall and they say, Peggy, I keep your books on my bedside table. When I've had a bad day and I feel like I can't go on, I read a chapter and I want to get up in the morning. Wow, that means, I can't tell you what that means to me.
I'd imagine that also gives you purpose.
It really does. Knowing your audience is really important too. If you're going to write, now you write for information, basically, probably. Yeah. You are informing people about something. I write to entertain. I write for laughs. Oh, a woman stopped me in the hall the other day and she said, my husband is really angry with you. I woke him up 2 times last night reading your book. She said, I just couldn't stop laughing. I laughed out loud, and my husband, he's really angry with you, she said.
Talk to me about finding your voice.
You know, I remember taking a course and asking the instructor, saying to her, I'm so afraid when I write that I'm going to write something that somebody else has already written, and I'm going to be accused of plagiarism. She said, no problem, because you will write in your voice. They've written in their voice. You can write the same material, but if it's in your voice, it's going to be different. Don't worry about that. Michael likes to tell people, took my mother 80 years to find her voice, and now she can't shut it up. You know, your voice is just something that comes to you. It's just the way that you are going to write, the way you're going to express yourself, what you want to accomplish in your writing. It just happens.
You carved your second act at a much later stage of life than most other people do. Do you think that you have a different philosophy on life than most other people?
There are advantages to waiting. Not that I did it intentionally, but to having your second act come later in life. There are definite advantages. To look on the humorous side, I've never been part of the Me Too movement. Sexual harassment is not a problem when you're 87. I don't have to worry about event organizers or publishers or editors or booksellers coming on to me. It just never, not one lousy time. But I call it an advantage. Yeah. Another advantage is I've never had to neglect my children for my career. In your second act, you don't have to do that. You know, Irma Bombeck is one of my favorite humorists and writers. She had 3 children, and she wrote a syndicated column that read by millions. So she had deadlines. She used to lock her office door to reach those deadlines with her kids on the other side. Now they weren't toddlers. They were older. And they knew she had the no blood rule. If there's no blood, do not bother me. Do not knock on my door. My kids were in their 50s and 60s when I hit my stride. They hardly ever whine outside of my door. But there are disadvantages. Like before, I couldn't remember something. Sometimes, even speaking to groups, I can't think of a word that I want to say. That's a disadvantage, and that's so typical of people my age. I don't have the energy level I used to. When I have a book out, I go to New York City, and I do press for 3 days. I come home and I sleep for a week. So I would suggest that if you have the opportunity to make it in your career when you're younger, jump on it.
What advice would you give to somebody who's retirement age or older who thinks maybe it's too late to embark on a second act?
Well, it depends on what you want to do. If your dream has always been to be a quarterback for the Ravens, for the Baltimore Ravens, and you're 69 years old, it ain't going to happen. You have to be realistic about your dreams. If you've always dreamt about being the principal dancer for the Bolshoi Ballet and you're 70, ain't going to happen. So you've got to be realistic about what can happen and what can happen. But, by and large, I tell people, gosh, it's never too late to have an interest and maybe accomplish something along the lines of your passion. I see people here at the home. Now, people can come in here at 60, and we have a group of at least 20 centenarians, over 100.
Wow.
A vibrant group of people in their 80s and 90s who participate in all kinds of activities. I mean, you name it, and they have it here. And games galore. My husband is 92. He was in the shuffleboard league. There were 92 teams. That means 184 players, and he came in second. He's 92. He plays in the bocce league. He was in the pool league. He swims in the swimming pool. He goes to a men's book club once a month. There is no reason you can't be vibrant at an older age. You just have to be realistic about it.
So can you leave us with just one story of the many, many, many stories that you've written? Like, what sticks out? What's the one that's just the go-to that slays the audience when they hear it?
Well, as I mentioned before, this story about my cancer journey, I've even surrounding me here at the home, there are so many people who are on this journey right now, who are getting chemo or radiation or having surgery, or their daughter or their son. And in fact, I just recently gave my third book called Vacuuming in the Nude that has my cancer story, gave it to a friend whose niece is going through terrible depression and doesn't want to go on. And I recommended not just my story to her, but, what do you call those groups? Support group that really helped me. Having a lifetime of experience at my age is the greatest advantage, really, of being a writer, of being a neighbor, of being a friend. You have such a wealth of information. You might not even realize you have it. Also, don't forget that it's never too late. I mean, it really is never too late to realize a passion that you've had in some form or other. And if you want to know about what it's like living in a group of 2,000 people, read my book.
Scott, another great interview. First question for you. Is this the oldest person you've interviewed for Second Act Stories?
Yeah, I believe Peggy may very well be the oldest person that I've interviewed. But, I think that's just because we don't really hear that much about people in their very advanced years just making these great strides.
So 80 years old, and she becomes a best-selling author. This is the definition of a late bloomer. If you had to pinpoint what you thought were the key elements that led to that success, what were the key things that stood out to you in your interview?
Well, I think the coolest thing is that just like almost every one of these interviews that we do with everybody who's made some sort of a sensational change, is that there is a backstory that makes it all make sense. right? So Peggy was always a writer. She was writing when she was young. She was writing when she was a teacher. She was writing through her, parenting years and her middle age. She's always been a writer. So writer versus published writer versus best-selling author, I think it was always there. And the best-selling author part just sort of came as a matter of happenstance. She had the stories to fill a book, and no publisher wanted her yet. So her son Mike had the means to help her become a published author by self-publishing, and that first run of 10,000 books sold out, and wouldn't you know it, all the publishers came knocking.
It's interesting. So this probably would have happened without Mike, but it also wouldn't have happened without just her ability. The book sold because people liked it and people talked about it, and that sold more books. Yes.
Yeah. Mike even said it. I helped you get your first book published the first time, but everything else that happened is all you.
She just sounds like an amazing woman. It must have been really fun to interview her.
It was an absolute joy. The most sprightly 87 that I could imagine, right? You wouldn't know her age just by talking to her, because she's so with it. She's so witty. She's so charming, and just a great conversationalist, and obviously a pretty amazing writer.
I think the big takeaway for me, and hopefully a takeaway for other people who are listening to today's story, you're never too old for a second act.
Yeah, while you're still on this side of the ground and you're still breathing the air and enjoying life, it's never too late. If you have a passion, you can still feed it if you're still alive.
I think that's a good note to wrap up on.
Great. If you would like to learn more about Peggy Rowe, you should follow her very active Facebook page. She posts there all the time. And if you want to read her books, and you should read her books because they are funny and relatable, you can find them all on Amazon or at your local bookseller. We're going to have some links in the show notes that you can follow.
My personal favorite title, by the way, is Vacuuming in the Nude. I thought was sort of an interesting image that she shared. So anyway.
Well, it certainly brings you into the mindset that you should have opening the covers of that book.
We hope you'll keep listening and subscribe to Second Act Stories on your favorite podcast app. Links to all of our social channels are also in the show notes. If you love what we're doing, we hope you'll consider rating us and leaving us a review on Apple. That helps other people find us.
Don't go away. There are more Second Act Stories just around the corner.